to episode 27 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slinsky.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. Show notes. Thank you for refreshing our reader mail pile. Keep those coming. Please send them to contact@bithellgames.com. That's contact@bithellgames.com. We have an interesting one coming up later in the show.
Exciting.
A lot of stuff to unpack in it.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to it. What are you playing, Mike?
Nothing, because my life is an endless stream of updating text files.
Nothing at all?
Literally haven't booted a console. I played like an hour of Doom after buying it and haven't played a video game since. How about you?
I've been playing The Kingsway, which is a rogue-like RPG that uses the graphical interface of a Windows Windows 3 Windows sort of 95-ish interface.
Nice. It looks cool. It's very distinctive, isn't it? It's very specific.
It is super distinctive,
yeah.
and even playing it brilliantly uses what it can by never leaving that interface. So when a map pops up and you decide to wander to another section of the map, and while you wander to that map, you're attacked by monsters. And the way battles work is that a pop-up window shows up and moves around on the screen, and you have to like click, to fight, but then you also have to block, and it is this sort of clicking between these windows to make sure that the combat is happening. But even while all of this is going on, some of the monsters will either cast spells or throw an object at you. So then this pop-up window, does an arc on the screen or like horizontally goes across the screen, and you have to like click on it to make sure that it goes away. It uses the interface just amazingly well.
Sounds really charming. I like that.
It is super charming, and I do actually strongly recommend picking it up if you're looking for a sort of a good roguelike, which there are so many of them now available, but this one definitely has
worthy
its
of
own,
your time, right?
Yeah, this one definitely has its own character and style, and but it does have some of the same trappings as pretty much every roguelike out there, where you sometimes don't feel. And then I guess this is one of those weird kind of things about roguelikes, is that some people just see into the matrix of how they need to min-max so that they can get past certain obstacles. And some folks are just completely like as has been stated on the show many times, I am the reason that you have a lot of simple features in games now. And one of those things in Kingsway is that before you can get to the final castle, which is on the east side of the map, so it's a journey from the it's a journey
left
east
to right, yeah.
And but along that path you have to light these certain fires so that you can open up the final castle. But while all of this is going on, there is a nothing coming from the east that is just sweeping over the land. And if you get caught up in it, you have to fight these monsters that are just way beyond your level, and you pretty much will lose. So one of the, after my sixth round or something like that, I finally made it to the castle at the end and tried to get in the castle. And it's like, nah, sorry, you didn't light the 3 fires on your way here. You can't get into the castle. I was like, oh no. So I went to a travel point and tried to go back, but I was like right in the middle of the nothing. And it was like, no, this is, I'm going to die.
I like that the theme of fantasy nihilism is returning in this episode. It's good.
Yeah. And so, but yes, the way you're supposed to do it is you are supposed to move around as much as you can in that section of the map so that you level up, so that you can go to the fire, light the fire, and then a sort of mini boss appears. And the thing about the mini boss is that the mini boss isn't easy. Like, the mini boss is definitely difficult. So you kind of have to have done your research to know how to beat that mini boss. And that's very typical in roguelikes. Like, even with why am I completely blanking right now on the famous one with the spaceship where you
FTL.
FTL. Even with FTL, like, I can get to the end, like no problem. Like, time and time again, I can get to the end and then just get obliterated because I can't. Whatever it is about that ending, or I just don't understand what else I'm supposed to be doing in the middle to level up. And I guess that's the difference to me between a roguelike and an RPG, or a classic RPG. And a classic RPG, like a Final Fantasy or Dragon Age or anything along those lines, is that there's this slope, right? And it's designed for that slope. So,
and it's designed to take you with it. A roguelike by its nature has to kind of bat you down over and over again in order for it to have longevity and be interesting, right? It sort of has to kick your ass a lot in a way that you don't want to do usually in a single player campaign, unless you're very good and you're trying to do something Dark Soulsy. You're as a designer, you're never trying to actually stop the player. You're just trying to make them winning be interesting, and roguelikes, you have to work against them a bit more.
And especially with a Dark Soulsian type of thing, I would love to see a case study on this, because for me, I think the psychology is about masochism. Like, I think it is about getting a small group of people to say this thing is so good that anyone who says it isn't good gets attacked immediately for not agreeing.
I don't know if I agree with that.
See, exactly.
It's a massive blind spot for me, is I've not played any of the Dark Souls games or any of the kind of the derivatives, but I think that's just something you're saying because you didn't like it. Like, I think
no, but I do. I don't
think they're all playing it in order to make a point on the internet. I think there is a joy to that level of performance. From hearing people talk about it, it sounds like the pleasure of Dark Souls is being that good. By the way, this is what all the YouTube comments are going to be about. So I'll point that out right now.
All those downvotes this week. That's exactly
Dark
what
Souls plays. No, I think it seems from the outside that that's where the fun is wanting to be that good, and I think that's something, the kind of the game design that I'm more prone to and that you tend to enjoy more, the kind of easier stuff. It doesn't reward that high tier play as much as it could. By definition, we're catering to a more general audience. So therefore, there will be games that cater very well to that high performance player, and they'll do well. And the reaction to them will be exactly the same. Indie films, right? These are the kind of the really clever artistic indie films, where a very small portion of the population absolutely love them because they are appealing to them on an artistic level, and the rest of us are like, that's a bit pretentious. That's Dark Souls is. It's catering very, very well to a small audience, and yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, and there is the sort of independent movie Kevin Smith version, which ends up being like Bloodborne, right? Where it is starting to find a more mass audience, and that's and I enjoy Bloodborne. Like, it definitely starts to,
some of my best friends play Bloodborne.
But it starts to cater to a larger audience. Anyway, Kingsway, sure. Back to Kingsway. It is very good. It has an immense amount of charm. It is smart. It uses it's what's the word I'm even looking for here? It's art direction as gameplay. Like, what am I trying to say there when I bring up, like, the pop-ups are the yes, they're like windows.
It's milking value out of its gimmick. It's finding every opportunity it can to make use of its setting.
Yeah, and does. But much like most roguelikes, you're not really sure where you are on the curve
at any given moment.
At any given time, and that's the thing I always struggle with roguelikes, is that I love the gameplay in them, and I really don't mind restarting over and over and over again, because, you know, frankly, like, that's the way, like, every Nintendo game worked when I was a kid. So I'm definitely used to restarting a game over and over and over again. But the difference here being that I don't know where I am on the curve at any given time, and I think I'm doing okay, but it's that same sort of feeling you get in Civilization where you think you're doing okay, but then you find out, like, someone's been on a continent across the sea this entire time and didn't have any competition and has just been sending out, like, diplomats or spies or, like, you know, whatever they want, like, the entire time. And then you suddenly show up and it's just like, oh, hi, we really appreciate your trebuchets and everything like that. Have you met our tanks? And that's Kingsway, and definitely check it out. Roguelike, interesting, use of interface, very cool. Have some fun, have some friends and fun.
Have friends and fun if you can. I mean, that's the goal we all have.
Now it's time for what's going on at the studio, and what's going on at the studio is very much like was mentioned on YouTube. We can't really talk at this exact moment about that, but very soon, so soon.
It's on the tip of our tongues, yeah.
It's so soon. But in the meantime, I'm being evicted.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
You shouldn't have had all those late night parties, Alexander. It's massively.
I love it. I love that when I mentioned this on Twitter, it could not have been the more classic American reaction that several people were like, "What did you do? What did you do to bring this upon yourself?" Because there's no way that, like, it's not your fault that this happened. And of course, telling British folks that I've been evicted, their reaction has been like, yeah, it's happened to me too. Because apparently it happens not so inconsistently here.
Touch wood, I've been very lucky, but yeah, it's yeah. So your landlord's moving into the property, aren't they? I think that's what it is. They're moving home.
Yeah, so it turns out that the 6-month break clause on my rental agreement was enacted. So I'll be looking for a new place because apparently if the landlord is moving back into your property, and yes, I checked with other lawyers about this, but yes, if the landlord is coming back into the property, they can evict you. So yeah, I'm Greenwich has been lovely. It's been a great time. Maybe we can find another place, but in the meantime, I need to start looking for another location, which is really fun given everything that's going on right now.
It's a great time for the studio, for you to be busy doing something as stressful as finding a house. Yeah.
It's just, the timing couldn't be more perfect. So I'll be looking for a new place before winter comes.
Sorry, I just like the stakes that were implied by that sentence.
Yeah, now it's
hard.
I mean, that's the other sort of issue here, is that refrigerators aren't as large here. So I can't just get refrigerator boxes. Like, a refrigerator box isn't going to fit me and Shepard like in there. And I mean, the underneath the railroad tracks, that's lovely. Like, I mean, that's actually some prime real estate nowadays that they sell off in London. But yeah, I need to find a new place.
You'll find somewhere. I think you should stay in Greenwich. You seem to love Greenwich, so
I do. But I have started looking around other parts of the city, and yeah, I've definitely discovered other sections of the city that I go, it's really nice here, and the rent is twice as much as I pay right now. Like,
and you pay a pretty high amount anyway.
Oh yeah.
London sucks for that. It really does.
Yeah. No. I am definitely paying like adult rent, and it is not. So yeah. So when you see like those prices, you're like, I don't understand how. I mean, I guess if I just gave up this whole thing and just got a really nice banking job.
Yeah, I was going to say the answer is stop working in the video games industry.
Stop working in the video games industry. My 100 hours a week in the video games industry. It's not true. We don't work 100
all those people Googling our net worths, and it's like, If you only knew, you'd be so disappointed.
It is definitely weird, especially as I get to know folks who are like in other industries.
Yeah.
At our level, right? Like, like they've been doing it for, like over 10 years, and it's just like they've got their summer home in like Tuscany. It's just like, oh, great. I like to ride the tube to the other side of the city. It's really nice. I like to spend a couple extra hours in the park.
I've never understood second homes. I don't think I ever will.
They're lovely if you can have them.
Why would you have them though? As opposed to just like staying at a nice hotel.
Because it's
just a house you're paying not to live in.
without room service too.
Well, exactly. Someone, what, you're going to clean up? Like, it just sounds like a lot of work. I don't know.
But yeah, I'm looking at places right now. I am considering the whole entire like trying to check out outside of, because that's the other weird thing too, is like when you look at when you're looking at London, like yes, there's the place where you go, oh, this is really lovely, and it costs twice as much, and then you look outside of London and you're like, oh, this is really lovely with an indoor pool. This is no joke. This is something that I found. Like it's 10 miles out of the city, but it's a converted barn that's been completely redone on the inside, and has a pool, an indoor pool, like in the whole, and it's beautiful. Like it is a beautiful thing, and it's exactly how much I pay for rent right now. And I'm like, what am I doing? How did Bithell sucker me into staying in London when I could have had a barn with a pool, just 10 miles out? So there's the part of me that's thinking a barn with pool is in my future type of thing. Like,
as is a morning commute, yeah.
As is a lengthy commute. But yeah, so that's what's going on at the studio right now. The things that we can't talk about are very, very soon to be talked about. And in the meantime, I have to get out of my place. So yeah, fun times.
1, 2, 3. I want to thank you for reading the Freedom Mail again. Thank you for reading the Freedom Mail again.
And this email comes to us from Tom T, and there's going to be a lot to unpack here, so buckle up, folks. Here we go.
All right, Tommy T, let's do this.
Tommy T, here we go.
Tommy T, this is it.
Dear sirs, I've avoided using your names as I don't want this to be a communique that breaks the comrade's back. I have no idea what that means.
Comrade's back.
My name is Tom T, and I very much enjoy your podcast. In fact, it's the only video games media I pay attention to these days, so my question's probably very out of date.
So, Tommy, please do not rely on this. Find somewhere else, because as well, like, but keep listening, of course. But like, yeah, we should not be your only source of information. That's not good. That is really not good.
I told you, buckle up. His
friend turns to me and says, "What's the latest news in the games industry?" She's like, "Well, Alexander Slawinski's getting evicted." Sorry, carry on.
He's moving to the country.
This is a. Did you know you can get a swimming pool in a barn these days? It's great.
It's amazing. So anyway, Tommy T.
Hey, Tommy.
I used to masquerade as a video game journalist, a charade for which quite a few PR companies somehow fell. During this pantomime, I was fascinated to discover. I knew you were going to love this.
This is the best email I've ever heard. I want to get the movie rights to this email.
Sorry, now I have to recover. Here we go. During this pantomime, I was fascinated to discover that much of the PR industry was composed of people I recognized from various video game media outlets.
Absolutely.
Some of them I was even a fan of. I make this blithe and anecdotal, not to mention based on a small sample size, observation, because my question is about how PR is handled in the video game industry. In promotional material and interviews, video game developers seem very reticent and uncomfortable. If asked specific questions about their job, or who did what on what game, even though there's some indication of a developer's role in the credits, sometimes citing NDAs but often not. This is a stark contrast to promotion and interviews in other mediums. In film, for instance, the talent, air quotes, working on a film is used as an important part of marketing. For mass promotion, you have the actors and the director, and for film buffs, you have more obscure roles such as photographers, costume designers, makeup artists, and the like. And if someone came up with something cool, their individual achievement may be used in promotion, and then develop into part of the, quote, myth of how a great film was made. I was wondering if this is simply due to an expectation of audience ignorance, teething problems with working out how to market rapidly changing and relatively new medium, if NDAs are just terribly written, or something else entirely. And his email will continue after this, but this is a good place to stop. And
there's a lot to talk about already. Yeah.
So regarding the myth portion, he actually had an asterisk in there.
Okay.
Which was Japanese marketing seems to take advantage of this. Thus, we have the Miyamoto cave myth, which is a reference to Legend of Zelda.
Yep.
Fans can easily name the likes of Kamiya, Iga, Suda, Kojima, associating them with the games they directed or produced, whereas with Western games, people are a little bit more likely to mention Rockstar Games rather than the Hauser brothers, for instance. So that's what he was talking about regarding the myths that are developed. So let's go back to where the sort of key question was. I was wondering if this is simply due to an expectation of audience ignorance, teething problems with working out how to market rapidly changing and relatively new medium, or if NDAs are just terribly written, or something else entirely. Okay,
something else entirely. Sorry.
Yeah. So I want to give the first sort of whack at this, and then I'll bounce it over to Mike because. One of the things is, yes, it is a relatively newish industry, but one of the things that I really, really awkwardly need to point out here is that the film industry and these other sort of places that you're talking about have this concept called unions. And the unions, did a lot more pushback. So there are some great documentaries that you can see how these little changes happen over time. If you have Netflix, or I'm sure you can get it in other ways, there's a documentary called Casting By, which is about casting directors, and they actually are one of the few people in the film industry that still doesn't have a Oscar statue nomination available, I believe. There's also That Guy from That Thing, which is about all these character actors that you know, but the way better follow-up is That Gal from That Thing, which is all the female sort of character actors that you have seen time and time and time again. And just when you watch those two movies back to back, just the contrast of what it's like to be a male character actor in the industry and a female character actor in the industry is like very, very different. But in the big thing, I'll let Mike go right now. But then the other thing we have to talk about then is the voice actor strike that is, I believe, currently the still ongoing. Which is the longest sort of strike.
I think there's a couple of publishers holding out, isn't there?
Yeah, and so we'll go back to that in a second. But Mike, take your portion of this right now.
So I've got a couple of points, and they're both kind of it's very interesting because obviously often we are too quick to compare the games and the films industries. I think I start way too many sentences with that because there are lots of similarities, and if you look at film history, you can definitely see a decent amount of stuff that's similar. And this is, and as Alexander points out, crediting is definitely, and crediting not in terms necessarily of crediting in the film, but crediting in terms of the way the product is sold and discussed, and interviews and all this stuff is something that there are lots of similarities. If you look at the origin of film. If you look at, or not the origin, but if you look at the industrialization of film, so the big Hollywood era, so the kind of the golden age, the kind of the end of the silent movie era, and the beginning of talkies, that moment where there were these kind of enormous corporations, and they owned monopolies. They sold films to their own cinemas. They had absolute control over production, distribution, everything. There was no home entertainment, so. They had it end to end. They had complete control. They owned the product, and they were very worried about giving anyone credit for the product because obviously if you give someone credit, that gives them political power. It lets them go to a different studio, or it lets them speak about your thing out of turn. And it would be a massive disaster for the industrial approach. The other side of it is that back then, the people producing movies were not brought in for a specific film. They were brought in and they were on contracts for 10, 20 years, and you would just work on whatever came across your desk. If you were an art director in the film industry, you would literally just you'd show up to work every day and what film are we working on today, and you'd work on that until it was done, and then you move on to another film. All of what I just discussed is exactly how AAA game development has worked for the last 10 years and still does. They are studios rather than individual games. You gather people around a studio. So that's the first point, is from a marketing point of view, game studios don't really want you to know who makes the games. It's not in their best interest. The best parallel to kind of modern film is probably the Marvel movies. Who directed Civil War? Captain America Civil War, Alexander?
I don't know.
Exactly. Who directed, I don't know, Inception?
Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. That's the difference, is that Marvel very much want you to follow their films all the way through. They want you to watch every Marvel movie. They don't really need you to know who makes those movies, because you might go and watch other films from other studios directed by those directors. So they actually downplay the role of directors and upplay the role of stars. What they've done very well is, and it is kind of a traditional movie. I know I'm going around the houses, I apologize, but I think it's useful information. They've actually built up these actors. A lot of the actors who are in the Marvel Universe were not big names before they were in the Marvel Universe. Many are, but many of them aren't. And they have kind of almost gone back with Marvel movies to a traditional kind of golden era form of filmmaking, where the studio owns everything and does everything. Games have tried to break out of this mold, which is why you've heard of Cliffy B. Because Cliff was definitely one of those people who was kind of elevated and allowed to speak to press and put out there, and very much they tried to create that kind of auteur.
Or Jaffe, or Molyneux.
It was an era, wasn't it? Kind of the late 90s, I guess, early 2000s. They tried to do this because I think the games industry realized, we want to be mass media, so we need some personalities. And if you look at what happened, they lost control. The studios, they created these Western superstars of game development, and then those superstars of game development realized they had power. That they could demand things, or they could go to different studios, or they could have influence, and that scared them. And that's the reason that you don't know the name of the creative director on the last Assassin's Creed, which is weird when you think about it. The idea that the average person still doesn't know any of these names is because, frankly, the studio wants you to buy the next Assassin's Creed. They don't necessarily want you to buy the next game by that creative director if they go elsewhere. The games industry, people move around a lot. People go to different jobs, especially in AAA. People tend to finish a project and move to a different studio. Consistency is important in marketing, and it's important to them that you don't realize that the things are being made by different people and that things are shifting. It's not relevant. And then the second point, and I apologize, I'll give the mic back to you in a moment, Alexander, but the second point is the auteur theory, is that if anything, film actually... And you're right to call it a myth. Film creates these narratives about production, which aren't really true. When I say, "Oh, that looks like a Tarantino movie," actually, I'm identifying the work of about 20 people who Tarantino takes with him on each film. And I think, unfortunately, his editor died. Did she die? I think she died.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was the editor. That's the classic Tarantino edit. That was a woman who he'd worked with on every film since Reservoir Dogs. And now, presumably, in future, another editor's going to have to come in and basically do stuff in a similar style, or at least kind of share some of the DNA of that work. But to the average cinema goer, a director literally grabs the camera, points it at what's going on, then gets back to the cutting room and cuts it together. Those are actually the jobs of 20, 30 people. DOPs, editors, all these job roles that, if you're a film fan, you know about, but the average kind of person doesn't. The reason I bring
Director of photography.
DOP, sorry, director of photography. So the reason I bring all that up is because that's a history that filmmaking has, largely because of French cinema. It was was it the New Wave? But there was basically a period where that was where it was decided that auteur theory would be the way we talk about films. In order to understand films and talk about them in any way that was manageable, we all started agreeing that films had authors, and that those authors would probably be directors. There are examples. You could argue that Tom Cruise is an auteur. Tom Cruise movies, they have a DNA. they definitely all feel like they're in a continuum. But that we would talk about films in that way. With games, I think actually there's a little bit of humility here that game developers, because we all know that games are made by teams, we try not to elevate the individual. And I say this as the guy who owns Bithell Games Studios. which was a choice that I didn't make, but the team made, and that's fair enough. But yeah, so I think if you look at kind of AAA, that's why is the studios don't necessarily want you to know the individuals making the game, because you might go and buy someone else's game instead of the next franchise installment. And I think the developers, to their credit, often don't want to take credit for, I'm the one who came up with this idea, because actually any game developer worth their salt knows that actually 5 people came up with that idea. One person might have mentioned it in the meeting, but 2 people were talking about it over lunch the previous day, and it took 3 other people to make it and get it into the game. So I think there's some humility there. What's interesting is with indies, because the teams are so much smaller, because you can literally point to Thomas Was Alone and say that's the work of 3 people. We actually start to be able to talk about our roles a bit more honestly, because there's literally one person doing that job. So you can say, well, that person definitely was responsible for that. And that's weirdly bringing more of that kind of film discussion to indie games. There's way more famous indie game developers right now than there are famous AAA creative directors, right? Like that's where the industry is right now. What's going to be interesting is to see if we hit the stage that Hollywood hit with kind of your Spielbergs and your Kubricks, where you actually started putting those weird indies in charge of big projects. And you ended up with these kind of mega star famous film directors who did come from an indie background. With the Spielberg era in particular, they were the first kind of generation to be formally educated at film school as well. Then you have your Kevin Smiths, who were the first generation to not bother being educated, which is where we're kind of at now with indies, where there are indies who are realizing maybe we don't need to go to university and learn game design. We can actually just kind of jump in and do it. So I think we're at a turning point where we are going to hear more names, and you're going to start understanding who's making your games more and more. The AAA space will hold out as long as they can, I suspect.
And this is a good time to also bring up, going back to the strike that's going on right now, but also this concept of royalties and the back end. Again, with movies and almost every other entertainment medium you are aware of, music, Broadway, movies, all of these things, there are royalties on the back ends, and the structure of those royalties are pretty much entrenched at this point.
Yeah, and there are industry norms for sure, right?
Yeah. And they've come about through years of lawyers fighting with agents and everything along those lines.
In the case of films, literally a century, right?
Yeah. And here we are with games, and this is another interesting place where because there is no union, but there are agents that exist now. And they have their objectives, and they are trying to get a piece of the back end for their clients. And then with many agents as well, especially talent agents, they are trying to get a piece of the back end for their star to be in a game. Now here's where it starts to get interesting again from the game developer perspective, because tell me the game that was floated on star power. That like there was an actor and they made that game, and that's the reason why people bought it. Other than Kim Kardashian, like there isn't really a solid example.
No, that would be the best recent example, wouldn't it? And I think but you also see that happening in film again. Marvel realizing that actually, we're not going to necessarily be able to open a movie with Robert Downey Jr., but we can open one with Iron Man, and building up those. And of course, with those are completely ownable intellectual property that doesn't age. So you can take, at some point Robert Downey Jr. will get too expensive, or frankly, he'll be too old to do all the physical stuff, and they will replace him. And people will still go and see those movies. And that's arguably the future is and that's where licenses make sense, right? That's where, because I could definitely name for you lots of video games that have done well because there's Transformers in them, or because they are tied to another big license or intellectual property. But I see what you mean. Like actors, you can't walk in as an actor and say, well, I will make your game a hit by being in your game. That's simply not the case.
Which is one of the most controversial aspects of the Screen Actors Guild strike. And
they bring a lot of value, obviously.
They do, but then you would absolutely make the argument of, well, then the sound person should get a piece, and then we start having
I actually tend to be on the opposite. Well, not the opposite side of the argument, but I tend to be on the side of the argument that is, when I see game developers complaining about this stuff, it's like, well, maybe we should unionize. We can't blame actors for having their shit together. We should do the same. Obviously, now I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be in the union. I'd be working with the union.
Management.
I'd be management. So I'm on the other side of the fence. But I think there should be a games industry union. I think that would ultimately be better for all of us. It would probably be worse for me personally, but as an industry, it would be better for all of us.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's why, Tom, your email brings up a lot of.
Tommy T. It's a good question, and he's not even done, right? There's more to this email.
Yeah, I mean the rest of it is pretty much praise. But this is the core. I mean, this is definitely the sort of core concept of his email, and it brings up a lot of topics that they're very, very nuanced.
I can see why it would be confusing from the outside as well, because you're not necessarily kind of privy to the politics of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that on some level, people think that. I'm trying to think of a good example without throwing someone under the bus.
Use me. That's always the rule. Use me.
I'm sure that people think that, or some people think that you are still getting residuals off of the games that you made prior to going independent. That you're still getting points.
No. Yeah, as in projects I was lead designer on before I went indie. No, yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. There isn't, that concept isn't there, and there are, and that's why agents exist, so that they could potentially do that for their clients. But even an agent to latch onto you in the first place, you have to be at a certain level.
Yeah, we're at a stage where that's the top tier, isn't it? That's the if anyone you could mention who is a known name either has an agent or has decided not to have an agent. They are, but yeah, in terms of, we're definitely not the film industry is at a point where if you're a promising screenwriter, you'll get an agent. You can get an agent very early. You need one, exactly. Very early in your career, you can get, and yes, as you say, need an agent. Whereas right now, the games industry is such that agents are the exception rather than the rule, right? They're only right now going after the big names.
Yeah. And there is a smoothing process that they absolutely bring to the conversation.
For sure, they have value. Yeah.
Yeah, they absolutely with everyone else, but it does become that conversation within studios, and I think it is that there is that sort of when we talk about production in movies and other things, there is that sort of worker blue collar thing that got us these unions and got us to where they are, whereas games came from a little bit more of a white collar background. So there is this it's all a meritocracy, which we know is a lie, but it's it's just well, if I work harder in the office, then the bosses will take care of me. And
there's other things as well. The fact that there is a lot of, and this is where NDAs do come in, there is a lot of privacy and a lot of people not talking. That was the main reason the GDC was founded in the first place, was because every game studio was kind of working in isolation. No one could talk about what they were working on. They were all under NDAs. They were all kind of locked down.
Not only were there NDAs, but there were non-compete clauses.
Exactly.
That you couldn't go to another studio for a portion of time after you.
Yeah, and those totally still exist, and that does stifle. That's it. Like, far be it from me to say that was intentional, but if one were trying to prevent unions from forming, that would be an excellent way of going about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a secret. Like the video games industry is very much doing everything it can to not let unionization happen, because the minute unionization happens, we are playing on a completely different field.
You could make a very compelling argument that AAA games, in the way that we know them, and the scope and the scale versus how much is spent on them, could not exist if the staff were able to negotiate overtime pay, discuss better treatment, ensure, basically that everyone gets paid. Like, the AAA industry
I'll take the management perspective on this. Like the issue, just the very idea of risk profile, that we are not going to make as much money, or we can't ensure the math doesn't become anymore like, okay, the game is going to cost us this much. We have really no other costs on the back. We don't have royalties on the back end, really. So we know that whatever money we make goes into coffers, so we've got this this is what our break even line is, and we can start putting that money towards the next project or whatever else it is after that. Once you switch to
a barn with a swimming pool in it.
Or a barn with a swimming pool in it. But once you switch to this idea where there's all of this stuff happening on the back end, the risk of that project like completely changes, because there's a much higher bar you need to hit so that other folks get involved. And then there's the weird sort of embarrassment of like, okay, this project didn't do so well, so now because people didn't get paid up front, they're getting paid, in some cases they're getting paid less up front because they've got skin in the game. Well, if the project didn't do that well, then you might not have the chance of having those games where it's like, okay, and this is totally consistent with the video game industry. Like, that first game comes out, it's okay, it could use a little bit of work, but it's all right. We'll figure it out in the sequel. And then you figure it out in the sequel, and boom, it's like this mega thing. Whereas that first game, that's like from a management perspective, has a much higher need to hit because of the number of things that are happening after the fact with that title.
None of which is an excuse to not union. Like I know that's not what you're saying.
No. Just to be clear, hold on.
I know what you're saying. Just to be just it is basically, though, just because a system is built on a shaky foundation doesn't mean that that's fair. Doesn't mean that should be the status quo. And I know that's not what you're saying, but it's interesting to hear that's the argument that I'm sure is being made by AAA.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of the times is like, I don't agree with these things, but
you see why they're there.
But I understand why they're there.
Yeah.
I would prefer this industry to be a lot more fair, and that a lot more people could, make a living off of it, because that brings more voices and more talents, and would I think we'd be further along artistically for sure, if there were more opportunities.
I think Tommy's reference to comrades was the right tone for this conversation. I think we should march in the streets. I'll make the flags. You can just, organize something, do a spreadsheet.
You're management, dude. You don't get to walk in the streets. Like, just enjoy your comfy chair and just make the games. Sit there and make your games.
I've studied too much history to sit in my chair comfortable while people are outside with flags. I know how that story ends.
So anyway, for some this is the rest of Tommy's email, and like I said, it's the positive reinforcement portion. And if it's too much, I'm sure Jonathan will cut this part. Anyway, for some positive reinforcement, I know you both like to joke about how unsexy your jobs are and how boring the show must be when you go into a lot of detail. For instance,
it's not a joke; it's an honest appraisal of the level of interest I would have in listening to this show.
Mike's brilliant diversion about why the player character pokes through the walls and floors in a first-person shooter, but there's clearly a somewhat knowledgeable audience out there that is interested in the nuts and bolts of video game development. If there wasn't, the pseudo-academic style of video game criticism wouldn't have exploded in ways no one at Gamasutra or GameIndustry.biz would have imagined.
I'm not sure I like the term pseudo there. Tommy, you're saying nice things, but I don't know. I'm very careful about calling anything pseudo-intellectual because unless you're inside the brain of the other person, you don't know if it's pseudo or legit.
And honestly, a lot of those folks, I'm not saying not all of them, but
what are you about to say?
No, a lot of those folks are qualified to have pseudo-academic like stances on things.
It's not pseudo, it's intellectual.
I know, I'm joking.
Okay, all right.
Like they definitely have the qualifications to have some to say some academic things about the games industry, whether through education or decades of experience.
And even if you disagree with them. And often I find myself in disagreeing with stuff I've read on the internet. That's what the internet's for. It doesn't make it pseudo-intellectual. It just makes it intellectual and disagreeing with you. You know, anyway, sorry, Tommy. I shouldn't be criticizing you, saying nice things. Carry on.
Oh dear, I mentioned one of you by name. Well, Alexander's content and that he's equally excited about cheesing Fallout 4 as he is about cheesing real life is perhaps the show's most unique strength. There isn't much media outside of the specialist sphere willing to go into detail on things like accounting and studiously following the law, not to mention shamelessly praising lawyers. A little suggestion, if I may. In the absence of guests, I think it'd make for great listening if you'd pick a feature topic now and then and discuss it in depth, not unlike how the guest would discuss the minutiae of their jobs in the past. Yours sincerely, Tommy T. So regarding your suggestion, I think this is the part where I start to say season 2 is going to be slowly wrapping up.
Yes.
So the season 2 was very much about. It started earlier this year where we discussed the game that we were pitching and that we were going to DICE and GDC. And, we've also acknowledged there have been some hiccups with that, but then some other stuff also occurred. So there's pretty much this underlying narrative that we never really got to talk about. And I think that's this is the episode of the TV show. This is the episode of Game of Thrones where everyone's on a boat.
This series. This is the... everything's moving into place. Yeah. So we're definitely coming to what would be the conclusion of season 2, because a couple things are, you're about to get your season 9 episode of Game of Thrones to follow your episode
through.
9, yeah, the big battle that like you go, oh, that's why they were on the boat. Yeah,
you're about to get your season your episode 9.
Yeah.
About to go down, and we've been leading up to it and sort of teasing it for a bit, but after that point, yes, there is definitely another transition that is going to happen.
I'd like to see more interviews coming back. I think that'd be really great.
Yeah, no, I would like to, whether we are blessed enough to do that on a bigger scale, we'll find out. But yes, having guests back or this sort of focus thing is definitely the
I like that idea as well. That's cool. Yeah.
So yeah, we're close to wrapping up season 2, getting ready for what we will call season 3, because that's how numbers work.
That's how numbers work.
But yes, I would certainly like to bring back guests. The whole reason for that is because we really were like the show during the last 9 months or so We have definitely been like behind the scenes doing a ton of stuff, and I just didn't have time to coordinate.
I think the fact that like we very rarely have games to talk about because we've not been playing video games is incredibly telling of how busy we've been. Like it has been crazy behind the scenes, and hopefully that's all about to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and once all what's going on is out there, it's also going to make a lot more sense for us to have guests and to cover specific topics and begin exploring that in detail. Because thank you to this audience. There's definitely you've clearly shown that you like this concept of delving a little bit deeper into the games industry and what's going on behind the scenes and the specifics of it. So it is something that we certainly would like to support it in such a way that makes sense and continues to bring more people to the table. So yeah, that's my very sweet thing that I don't typically say.
Thank you very much, Tommy T. That's a good question and gave us most of the content of this episode.
Yeah, so if you have a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@bithlgames.com. That's contact@bithlgames.com, through the YouTube comments of this show, or on Twitter by pinging @MikeBithell or @Slawinski. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide reviews and 5 stars on iTunes, likes and subscribes on YouTube, and positive reinforcement on whatever other platforms you're hearing this show on whenever possible. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downin, more so this week than regular. We'll be back next week. I'm Alexander Slawinski. Thanks again, and get in the last word, Mike.
Pepper.